She gave birth to his child alone. Her billionaire husband was sharing a bed with another woman. What she did next, a great story of a powerful woman. Hi, my beautiful family. I'm speaking to you with an open heart. Right now, our reach has dropped so much that sometimes I feel like I'm slowly fading, like one day I could disappear from your lives as if I never existed. But my love for you remains strong, unshaken, and real. Please stay with me. Your likes, comments, and shares may seem small, but they breathe life into this family and keep our stories alive. Together, we can rise again and show the world that nothing can silence the bond we've built. I've poured my heart and soul into this channel, working up to 18 hours a day to bring you stories. I've even faced 2 minor heart attacks during this journey. But without your support, this could be the last time you ever hear my voice. I need you now more than ever, my beautiful family. Let's keep our stories alive. The morning sun painted golden patterns across the hospital floor as Zelda Rose moved through her routine with the gentle precision that had made her beloved among both patients and staff. Her soft-soled shoes whispered against the polished tiles as she arranged fresh flowers in the crystal vase, transforming the sterile room into something warmer, more human. She believed deeply that healing required more than medicine. It demanded beauty, kindness, and the touch of someone who truly cared. You're too good for your own well-being, Margaret warned from the doorway, her weathered face creased with maternal concern. The head nurse had watched countless idealistic young women enter these halls, most of them eventually hardened by the realities of human suffering and ingratitude. The new patient arriving today, he's different from the others, demanding, expects the world to revolve around his whims. Zelda smiled softly, her dark hair catching the light as she turned. Everyone deserves compassion when they're vulnerable, Margaret. Pain doesn't discriminate between rich and poor. Child, your heart is too pure for this world, Margaret replied, shaking her head. Some people mistake kindness for weakness. They see gentle souls like you as something to be conquered rather than cherished. The elevator chimed its arrival, and Zelda watched as an entourage of stern-faced men in expensive suits emerged, surrounding a stretcher like guards protecting royalty. But her attention was drawn immediately to the man lying upon it, tall and striking, with dark hair and sharp features that would have been handsome if not for the arrogant set of his jaw, even in unconsciousness. This was Brian Armstrong, and she could sense his power even in vulnerability. The transfer proceeded with military precision, his assistants barking orders about temperature, privacy, and communication protocols. Yet through all the commotion, Zelda observed the man himself, noting the tension that remained in his shoulders, even in sleep, the slight tremor in his hands, the way his breathing caught when awareness flickered behind his closed eyelids. Everyone out, he commanded the moment consciousness returned, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone who had never been denied. I need to contact my people immediately. There are urgent matters that cannot wait. You need to rest, Zelda interrupted gently, stepping forward as his entourage reluctantly filed out. I'm Zelda, and I'll be caring for you during your stay here. Brian's piercing blue eyes fixed on her with surprise, as if he couldn't quite process being contradicted by someone in simple scrubs. Do you have any idea who I am? You're a man who's been hurt, she replied simply, checking the monitors beside his bed with practiced efficiency. Right now, that's all that matters to me. Something flickered across his features, surprise, perhaps even relief, before the mask of superiority slipped back into place. I don't need sympathy. I need competent care and to return to my responsibilities as quickly as possible. Sympathy. Zelda raised an eyebrow, her voice remaining calm despite his condescending tone. I don't offer sympathy to anyone, but I do believe in treating every person with dignity, regardless of their status or attitude. Brian fell silent, studying her face as if searching for some hidden agenda. Most people who spoke to him wanted something, access to his world, favors, connections. But this woman's brown eyes held only professional concern and unexpected warmth. With no hint of calculation or desire for personal gain, the physician will visit you shortly, Zelda continued, adjusting his intravenous line with gentle expertise. Until then, try to rest. True healing requires surrender, not control. I don't rest during daylight hours, he protested, though his eyelids were already growing heavy from the prescribed medication. Today you do, she said softly, dimming the lights with a quiet authority that surprised them both. Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is admit we need time to recover. As she moved toward the door, his voice stopped her. Wait. When she turned back, his expression had shifted, vulnerability replacing arrogance like clouds parting to reveal hidden sky. What did you mean about dignity? Zelda paused, considering her words carefully. I mean that every person who enters these doors carries more than physical wounds. Sometimes the invisible injuries hurt the most. Wealth can purchase the finest medical care, but it can't buy genuine human connection or inner peace. Something in her tone seemed to resonate deep within him, and for the first time since his arrival, Brian Armstrong looked truly present. And you think I need that? Inner peace? I think everyone does, she replied. The question is whether you're brave enough to accept it when it's offered. With that, she left him alone with his thoughts, unaware that she had just planted a seed that would grow into something far more dangerous than either of them could imagine. Over the following days, Brian found himself anticipating Zelda's shifts with an eagerness that surprised him. She treated him neither with the fawning deference he usually received, nor the intimidation that his reputation often inspired. Instead, she spoke to him as if he was simply another human being, a novelty in his carefully constructed world of power and isolation. Your flowers are dying, he observed one afternoon as she reviewed his chart. All beautiful things fade, she replied matter-of-factly. That's what makes them precious while they last. Permanence isn't what gives life meaning. It's the knowledge that everything passes, so we must cherish what we have while we have it. Philosophy from a nurse? His tone carried amusement rather than condescension now. Wisdom from a woman who's learned that the most valuable things in life can't be purchased. She replaced the wilting lilies with fresh roses, their deep crimson petals catching the afternoon light like captured fire. These came from the hospital garden. Volunteers tend them with love, not because they receive payment, but because they understand that beauty has the power to heal wounded spirits. Brian watched her hands as she arranged the flowers, noting the absence of expensive jewelry, the practical short nails, the small scar on her thumb that spoke of a life lived through experience rather than luxury. You're different from everyone else. Different how? You don't want anything from me. He paused, studying her face with growing wonder. You actually seem to enjoy my company for its own sake, not for what it might lead to. Zelda met his gaze directly, her expression serious. What makes you think you have anything I want? The question hung in the air between them, and Brian felt something shift in his chest, a crack in the armor he'd built around his heart since childhood. Most people who engaged with him had ulterior motives, hidden agendas, carefully calculated approaches designed to extract maximum benefit from their interaction. But this woman seemed genuinely content to simply be present with him, to offer her time and attention as gifts rather than investments. Most people want my influence, my connections, my access to power. And what do you want, Brian? She asked softly. The use of his first name, spoken without title or pretense, sent unexpected warmth through him. Nobody had asked him what he wanted in longer than he could remember. Everyone always assumed they knew. More control, more wealth, more dominance over others. He began, then stopped, uncertain how to voice something he'd never allowed himself to acknowledge. I want someone to see me as more than my achievements. Then perhaps you should try being someone worth seeing beyond those achievements. Zelda replied gently, Though her words carried the weight of absolute truth, their conversations became the highlight of his recovery. She would tell him about her other patients, never breaking confidentiality, but sharing stories of human resilience and hope that fascinated him. There was the elderly man who wrote poetry for his deceased wife, the young mother who sang lullabies to her premature twins, the teenager who painted murals to thank the staff who saved his life. Each story revealed Zelda's deep capacity for seeing the sacred in the ordinary, the profound in the mundane. In return, he found himself revealing glimpses of the man beneath the powerful facade, speaking of childhood dreams, abandoned for family expectations, and the loneliness that accompanied unlimited authority. He told her about wanting to be a teacher once, about how he used to read to children at the local library before his father deemed it unsuitable for their family image. He spoke of board meetings, where he felt like an actor playing a role, of penthouse dinners, where conversations felt scripted and hollow. "Do you ever regret the path you've chosen?" she asked one evening as visiting hours drew to a close. Brian considered the question seriously. "Regret is a luxury I've never permitted myself. But lately," he paused, his eyes finding hers in the gathering darkness. "Lately I wonder what I might have become if I'd made different choices." "It's never too late to make different choices," Zelda said quietly. "Isn't it? I'm established in my ways, surrounded by people who only value what I can provide for them. You're speaking to someone right now who values none of those things," she pointed out. The simple truth of her statement hit him like a revelation. Here was a woman who had seen him at his weakest, who had listened to his fears and insecurities, who treated him with kindness despite his often difficult behavior. And she asked for nothing in return except that he be genuine. "Zelda," he said, his voice rougher than usual, "would you have dinner with me after I'm discharged?" She tilted her head, studying his face with those perceptive brown eyes. "Are you asking me as the powerful man who expects compliance, or as Brian, the person who's been sharing his thoughts with me these past weeks?" "Just Brian," he said quietly. "If you can see past everything else and find just Brian worthy of your time." A small smile touched her lips, transforming her entire face. "I'd like that very much." As she prepared to leave for the night, Brian caught her hand gently. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me." But as Zelda walked down the hospital corridor toward home, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just stepped onto a path that would forever change her life, though whether that change would bring joy or devastation remained hidden in the shadows of an uncertain future. Chapter 2, The Illusion of Perfect Marriage. Zelda stood before the mirror in her modest apartment, hardly recognizing the woman staring back at her. The emerald silk dress Brian had chosen brought out the gold flecks in her brown eyes, and the diamond necklace resting against her throat caught the light like captured stars. Yet beneath the luxury, she remained fundamentally unchanged, the same woman who had seen past his wealth to find the lonely soul hiding beneath. "You're trembling," Brian observed from the doorway, his voice soft with concern. He crossed the room with confident strides, his hands settling gently on her shoulders. "Second thoughts?" "Oh, not about you," she whispered, leaning into his touch. "About all of this, the photographers, the society pages, the way people look at me now like I'm some kind of fortune hunter." Brian turned her to face him, his blue eyes intense with emotion. "Let them look. Let them whisper. You know the truth, and I know the truth. You fell in love with a broken man in a hospital bed, not a bank account. And you fell in love with a nurse who challenged you to be better," she replied, reaching up to straighten his tie. "Promise me that won't change, Brian. Promise me that no matter what happens, we'll always remember why we fell in love." "I promise," he said, sealing the vow with a kiss that tasted of forever. The wedding ceremony unfolded like a fairy tale that Zelda had never dared to dream. The cathedral's soaring arches seemed to embrace them as they exchanged vows, their words carrying the weight of absolute sincerity. when Brian slipped the platinum band onto her finger. His hands shook slightly, not from nerves, but from the overwhelming realization that someone loved him not for what he could provide, but for who he was beneath all the armor. Brian, take you, Zelda, to be my wife, he spoke, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed sanctuary. I promise to cherish your gentle spirit, to protect your kind heart, and to never let the world's cynicism touch the light you've brought into my life. Zelda's eyes filled with tears as she responded, her voice steady, despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. Zelda, take you, Brian, to be my husband. I promise to love the man you are and support the man you're becoming. I promise to be your safe harbor in every storm, and to never let you forget that true strength comes from vulnerability shared with someone who loves you. The reception that followed blurred past in a whirlwind of congratulations and champagne toasts. But for Zelda, the most precious moment came when Brian pulled her aside during the dancing, his expression serious despite the celebration surrounding them. I need you to know something, he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm as they swayed to the music. I've never believed in forever before, but standing here with you, I finally understand what it means to want to spend eternity with someone. Show me, she whispered against his ear. Every day for the rest of our lives, show me. Their honeymoon passed like a dream painted in shades of azure and gold. Away from the pressures of his world, Brian revealed sides of himself that Zelda had only glimpsed during their courtship. He laughed freely, his guard completely down as they explored ancient ruins and shared quiet moments watching the sunset paint the sea in brilliant colors. I could stay here forever, he murmured one evening as they sat on their villa's terrace. Zelda curled against his side. We could, she agreed softly, but running away isn't living. We have to take this feeling back with us and make it part of our real life. You're right, he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. We'll build something beautiful together, won't we? Something real and lasting. The most beautiful thing of all, she promised. The early period of married life seemed to validate every hope and dream they had shared. Brian made genuine efforts to shed the harsh edges of his previous existence, consulting Zelda before making decisions that would affect their life together. He established a charitable foundation inspired by her stories of the patients she had cared for, and found unexpected fulfillment in using his resources to help others. You've changed me, he told her one night as they lay entwined in their bedroom, moonlight streaming through the windows. I look in the mirror now and see someone I actually like. I didn't change you, Zelda corrected gently, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. I just loved you enough to let you become who you really are. It was during one of these perfect moments that Zelda discovered she was carrying their child. The pregnancy test lay on the bathroom counter like a harbinger of dreams fulfilled. And when she emerged to find Brian reading in bed, her radiant smile told him everything before she spoke a word. We're going to have a baby, she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. Brian's book tumbled forgotten to the floor as he swept her into his arms, spinning her around the room with joyous laughter. A baby, he repeated, as if testing the miraculous reality of the words. A baby. They spent hours that night planning their child's future, choosing names, designing the nursery, and imagining the family they would become. Brian's excitement seemed genuine and overwhelming, his hands constantly drawn to her still flat stomach, as if he could already feel the life growing within. I want to be the father I never had, he confessed as they finally settled down to sleep. Patient, present, the kind of man our child will be proud to call Daddy. You will be, Zelda assured him, though something in his tone sent a tiny shiver of unease through her heart. The first subtle changes appeared gradually, so slowly that Zelda initially dismissed them as natural adjustments to their new reality. Brian began spending longer hours away from home, claiming he needed to secure their family's future. His phone calls became more frequent and intense, his conversations filled with sharp edges that reminded her uncomfortably of the man she had first met in the hospital. You're pushing yourself too hard," she observed one evening as he paced their living room, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand gesturing angrily at someone who couldn't see him. "I'm doing what needs to be done," he replied curtly when the call ended, his tone colder than she had heard since before their wedding. "Brian," she said softly, rising from the couch to approach him. "Talk to me, what's wrong?" For a moment, his expression softened and she glimpsed the vulnerable man she had fallen in love with. "Nothing's wrong. There's so much responsibility now. A wife, a baby coming. I need to make sure I can provide for you both." "We don't need more than we have," Zelda reminded him, her hands finding his face. "We need you present, not absent. We need your heart, not your wealth." "You don't understand," he said, pulling away slightly. "You've never had to worry about supporting a family, about the weight of everyone depending on you for survival." The words stung more than he seemed to realize, and Zelda felt something cold settle in her stomach. "I understand more than you think. I've seen families with nothing but love thrive, and families with everything but love crumble. Which do you want us to be?" Instead of answering, Brian turned away, his shoulders tense with an emotion she couldn't quite identify. "I'm going to my study. I have matters to attend to." As she watched him walk away, Zelda pressed a protective hand to her growing belly. "It's just stress," she whispered to the child within. "Daddy loves us. He's just scared about being responsible for us." But deep in her heart, a seed of doubt began to take root, a whisper that perhaps the man she had married was not as completely transformed as they had both believed. The pregnancy that should have drawn them closer seemed to be driving an invisible wedge between them, and Zelda found herself wondering if Brian's promises of forever would prove as fragile as morning mist. That night, as Brian worked late in his study and she lay alone in their bed, Zelda stared at the ceiling and tried to convince herself that love would be enough to overcome whatever darkness was creeping into their perfect world. But the distance between them felt like a chasm growing wider with each passing day, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was losing the man she had fought so hard to save from his own loneliness. The baby kicked gently inside her, as if sensing her distress, and Zelda placed both hands over her belly protectively. Whatever happened between her and Brian, she would not let their child suffer for the sins of its parents. That much, at least, she could control. Chapter 3. The Emergence of Betrayal. The morning sickness had finally subsided, but Zelda found herself facing a different kind of nausea as she stared at the empty space beside her in bed. Brian's side remained cold and untouched. He hadn't come home again last night. Another urgent situation, she noted with growing concern, her hand instinctively moving to her rounded belly, where their child grew stronger each day. "Another emergency," she murmured to herself, reciting the explanation he had given over the phone the previous evening. His voice had sounded distant, distracted, as if he were speaking to her from another world entirely. Downstairs, she found a note propped against the coffee maker in Brian's precise handwriting. "Unexpected developments require my immediate attention. Don't wait up. Take care of yourself and our baby." But as the formal tone made her chest tighten, when had he stopped signing his notes with words of love? When had their communications become so cold and impersonal, stripped of the warmth that had once defined every interaction between them? Margaret's words from the hospital echoed in her mind. Some people see kindness as weakness. Zelda shook her head, refusing to let doubt poison her thoughts. Brian was under pressure, that was all. The responsibility of impending fatherhood was overwhelming him, just as it would any man facing such a monumental change. The phone rang as she poured her herbal tea, and her heart leaped with hope. "Brian? Sorry to disappoint," came her sister Sarah's voice, tinged with concern. "I was calling to check on you. You sounded strange when we talked yesterday." "I'm fine," Zelda replied automatically, settling into the breakfast nook where she and Brian used to share lazy morning conversations. "Just tired. The pregnancy, you know. Zelda, Sarah's tone grew serious. I saw the pictures from the charity gala last week. Brian was there without you. I had a medical appointment, Zelda explained, though the memory still stung. She had been looking forward to the event for weeks, had even bought a new maternity dress. But Brian had insisted the appointment couldn't be rescheduled, even though she had offered to arrange it differently. With Felicia Phillips, Sarah continued gently. They looked close. Zelda's grip tightened on the phone. Felicia Phillips, a name that had begun appearing more frequently in conversations about Brian's professional life. A sophisticated woman with connections throughout their social circle, someone who moved in the same elite spheres that Brian inhabited. She's a colleague, Zelda said firmly. Someone important for his work. You know how these events are, all networking and professional obligations. Zelda. Sarah, please. The exhaustion in her own voice surprised her. I can't do this right now. Brian is working hard for our family. I won't let gossip and speculation poison what we have. After hanging up, Zelda sat in the quiet kitchen, her hands cradling her growing belly. The baby kicked gently, as if sensing her distress, and she forced herself to smile. Your daddy loves us, she whispered. He's just scared about providing for us. Everything will be okay. But even as she spoke the words, they felt hollow in the empty house. Brian stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office. The city spread out below him like a kingdom he had conquered through sheer force of will. Yet today, the view brought him no satisfaction. His reflection in the glass looked haggard, older than it should, and he couldn't shake the image of Zelda's trusting face from his mind. You look terrible. Felicia Phillips observed from the doorway, her voice carrying the smoky quality that had first caught his attention. She entered without invitation, as was her way, her heels clicking against the marble floor with predatory precision. Thank you for that observation, Brian replied dryly, though he didn't turn around. What do you want, Felicia? The same thing I've wanted for weeks, she said, moving to stand beside him at the window. You. Her directness had been refreshing at first, so different from Zelda's gentle, nurturing approach to life. Where his wife offered comfort and understanding, Felicia provided challenge and excitement. Where Zelda saw the best in everyone, Felicia understood the darker realities of power and ambition. I'm married, he said, the words feeling strange on his tongue. To a woman who doesn't understand your world, Felicia replied smoothly. Tell me, Brian, when was the last time Zelda discussed strategy with you? When did she last understand the pressures you face, the decisions that keep you awake at night? Brian's jaw tightened. It was true that Zelda's attempts to discuss his work often felt naive, her suggestions rooted in idealism rather than the harsh realities of his position. She wanted him to consider the human cost of every decision, to prioritize compassion over profit, to be the man she believed he could become rather than the man the world demanded he be. She's pregnant with my child, he said quietly, and I'm not asking you to abandon your responsibilities. Felicia moved closer, her hand resting lightly on his arm. I'm offering you something different, something that complements your real nature instead of trying to change it. The touch burned through his shirt, igniting desires he had been trying to suppress for weeks. Felicia understood his hunger for power, his need to dominate and control. With her, he didn't have to pretend to be gentle or consider consequences beyond his own desires. This is wrong, he whispered, even as he turned to face her. Wrong, according to whom? She challenged, her green eyes holding his gaze steadily. According to a woman who knew you briefly and decided to remake you into her image of the perfect husband. Or wrong according to your own nature, Brian. Her words struck deep, hitting insecurities he had buried beneath domestic happiness. Was Zelda's love genuine, or was she simply trying to transform him into something more palatable? Did she love him, or the idealized version of him she had created in her mind? She loves me, he said, but the words lacked conviction. She loves who she thinks you are, Felicia corrected. I love who you actually are. The powerful, ruthless, magnificent man who built an empire through strength and determination. Why should you apologize for that? Before he could respond, she pressed her lips to his, and the last of his resistance crumbled. In Felicia's arms, he felt like himself again, powerful, dominant, free from the constant pressure to be better, kinder, more considerate. She didn't ask him to change. She celebrated him exactly as he was. When they finally broke apart, guilt crashed over him like a physical blow. Zelda's face appeared in his mind, trusting, loving, currently carrying his child while believing in their shared future. "I have to go," he said roughly, stepping away from Felicia. "Of course you do," she replied with satisfaction. "But you'll be back, Brian, because this is who you really are, and eventually, even you will stop pretending otherwise." As he drove home through the evening traffic, Brian's hands gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. What had he done? How had he allowed himself to betray the one person who had loved him unconditionally? But even as guilt consumed him, another part of his mind replayed the feel of Felicia's lips, the way she made him feel powerful and desired, without asking him to be anything other than what he was. With Zelda, he constantly felt the weight of her expectations, the pressure to live up to the man she believed him to be. With Felicia, he could simply exist without judgment or the need for transformation. He found Zelda in the nursery they had been decorating together, hanging a mobile of dancing bears above the crib. Her face lit up when she saw him, and the pure joy in her expression made his stomach clench with self-loathing. "You're home," she said, crossing to him with the graceful movements of advancing pregnancy. "I was starting to worry." "Sorry," he muttered, accepting her kiss but unable to meet her eyes. The situation ran longer than expected. "It's okay," she assured him, her hands smoothing over his chest in a gesture that once would have comforted him, but now felt like an accusation. "I know how important your work is. But maybe this weekend we could spend some time together, just the two of us before the baby comes?" "Maybe," he said noncommittally, his mind already returning to Felicia's office, to the intoxicating freedom of being desired without conditions. As Zelda showed him the nursery decorations she had chosen, chattering excitedly about their future child, Brian nodded and made appropriate responses while his thoughts wandered elsewhere. He was already planning his next meeting with Felicia, already crafting excuses that would allow him to escape the suffocating perfection of his domestic life. That night, as Zelda slept peacefully beside him, her hand resting on her rounded belly, Brian stared at the ceiling and wondered how long he could maintain the charade of being the man she believed him to be. The web of lies was already growing more complex, and with each passing day, it became easier to choose Felicia's passionate acceptance over Zelda's conditional love. He told himself that Zelda would never know, that he could compartmentalize these two parts of his life indefinitely. But deep down, he understood that betrayal had a way of revealing itself, and that the foundation of his marriage was already cracking beneath the weight of his deception. Chapter 4. The Night of Ultimate Abandonment. The contraction started just after midnight, pulling Zelda from restless sleep with a force that made her gasp aloud. She lay still for a moment, her hand pressed against her swollen belly, timing the waves of pain that seemed to roll through her entire body with increasing intensity. "Brian," she whispered, reaching across the bed, but her fingers found only cold sheets. He hadn't come home again. Another night that his urgent obligations had kept him away from their bed, away from her, away from the child who would arrive any moment now. Another contraction gripped her, stronger this time, and she couldn't suppress the moan that escaped her lips. This was it. After all these months of waiting, their baby was finally coming. She fumbled for her phone on the nightstand, her hands shaking as she scrolled through her contacts to find Brian's number. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail. His voice, professional and distant, instructed her to leave a message. "Brian, it's me," she said, trying to keep the panic from her voice. "The contractions have started. I think it's time. Please, I need you to come home. I need you with me." She hung up and waited, counting the minutes between contractions as they grew stronger and closer together. Surely he would call back immediately. Surely nothing could be more important than the birth of their child. Minutes passed, then more, then still more. Zelda called again, this time unable to keep the desperation from her voice. "Brian, please answer your phone. The baby is coming now. I'm scared and I need my husband. I need you to be here with me. Please." The silence that followed felt deafening. Between contractions, she tried every number she could think of. His office emergency line, his assistant's contact, even colleagues she barely knew. Each call went unanswered, each voicemail left hanging in the void of his deliberate absence. At his penthouse apartment across the city, Brian's phone buzzed insistently on the nightstand, but he made no move to answer it. Felicia's head rested on his chest, her auburn hair spilling across his skin like liquid fire, and her breathing had finally steadied after their passionate encounter. "Your phone," she murmured sleepily, her finger tracing lazy circles on his chest. "It can wait," he replied, his arm tightening around her waist. "Everything can wait. What if it's important?" she asked, though her tone suggested she didn't really care. Brian glanced at the screen, seeing Zelda's name and photo illuminated in the darkness. His pregnant wife's face smiled back at him, a picture from their honeymoon when everything had seemed possible, when he had believed he could be the man she wanted him to be. "It's not important," he said, reaching over to turn the phone face down. "Nothing is more important than this moment." Felicia smiled and pressed her lips to his throat. "I love how decisive you are, how you prioritize what really matters." "You matter," he whispered against her hair. "This matters. Everything else is just obligation." Even as he spoke the words, something twisted in his chest, a feeling he quickly pushed away. He had made his choice. He had chosen passion over duty, desire over responsibility, the intoxicating freedom Felicia offered over the suffocating expectations of marriage and fatherhood. Back in their bedroom, Zelda struggled to her feet as another contraction nearly brought her to her knees. The pain was becoming unbearable, and she knew she couldn't wait much longer. With trembling fingers, she called her doctor, who confirmed what she already knew. It was time to get to the hospital. "Is your husband available to drive you?" Dr. Martinez asked kindly. Zelda closed her eyes, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. "He's unavailable. I'll call a cab." "Zelda, you shouldn't be alone for this. I'll be fine," she interrupted, though her voice broke on the words. "I'll be fine." The cab ride to the hospital blurred past in a haze of pain and disbelief. How could Brian not be answering his phone? How could he not be here for the most important moment of their lives? She continued calling him, even as the contractions grew stronger, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails that went unheard. "Brian, I'm at the hospital now. The baby is coming fast and I'm terrified. Please, I'm begging you, come to me. I can't do this alone. I need you. Your child needs you. Where are you?" The admission process became a blur of questions she could barely focus on answering between waves of pain. When the nurse asked for her emergency contact, she gave Brian's number with a confidence that felt increasingly hollow. "We'll keep trying to reach him," the nurse assured her as they moved her to the delivery room. "I'm sure he'll be here soon." But as the hours passed and labor intensified, it became clear that Brian would not be coming. Zelda found herself surrounded by medical professionals who offered clinical support, but couldn't fill the aching void where her husband should have been. "I can see the head," Dr. Martinez announced, her voice filled with excitement. "You're doing beautifully, Zelda. Your baby is almost here." "Is he? Has my husband?" Zelda gasped between pushes, still clinging to the hope that Brian would appear at the last moment. "Focus on your baby," the doctor said gently. "You're incredibly strong, and you can do this." as her child entered the world with a powerful cry that filled the delivery room. Zelda felt a strange combination of overwhelming joy and devastating heartbreak. Her daughter, their daughter, was perfect, with Brian's dark hair and what would surely be his striking features. But he wasn't there to see her first breath, her first cry, her first moments of life. "She's beautiful," Dr. Martinez said, placing the baby on Zelda's chest. "Perfect in every way." Zelda looked down at her daughter through tears that wouldn't stop falling. "Hello, little one," she whispered, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. "I'm your mama, and I love you so much. Your daddy loves you too. He couldn't be here." The lies felt bitter on her tongue, but she couldn't bear for her child's first moments to be tainted with the truth of abandonment. Across the city, Brian's phone finally fell silent after hours of ignored calls. Felicia stirred in his arms, checking her own phone for the time. "It's almost dawn," she observed. "Shouldn't you be getting home soon, before your wife wakes up and realizes you were gone all night?" "She's used to it by now," Brian replied, though something cold had settled in his stomach. The guilt he had been suppressing was creeping back, demanding acknowledgement. "Good," Felicia said, pressing closer to him. "I hate sharing you, even with someone as insignificant as her." Brian said nothing, staring at the ceiling as the first rays of sunlight crept through the windows. Somewhere across the city, Zelda was sleeping peacefully, unaware of his betrayal, trusting in his love even as he systematically destroyed everything they had built together, or so he told himself, refusing to look at his phone or confront the growing pile of missed calls and unheard voicemails that would shatter the illusion of his blameless infidelity. In the hospital room, Zelda held her sleeping daughter close to her chest, studying every perfect feature in the soft morning light. She had stopped crying hours ago, had stopped calling Brian's phone, had stopped making excuses to the nurses about why her husband wasn't there. "It's just you and me now." "Sweet girl," she whispered to her daughter. "But that's okay. We're going to be okay. Mama's going to take care of you and love you and make sure you never feel abandoned the way I do right now." The baby stirred in her arms, tiny fingers curling around Zelda's thumb with instinctive trust. In that moment, looking into her daughter's peaceful face, Zelda felt something shift inside her, a strength she hadn't known she possessed, a fierce protectiveness that transcended her own pain. "I promise you," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word, "that no matter what happens, you will always know you are loved. You will always know you matter. And someday, when you're old enough to understand, I'll tell you about the night you were born, and how you saved me by giving me a reason to be stronger than I ever thought possible." As the sun rose fully over the city, casting warm light through the hospital window, Zelda began to understand that while one chapter of her life had ended in the darkness of abandonment, another was beginning in the light of unconditional love, a love that would prove more powerful than any betrayal. She named her daughter Grace, knowing instinctively that this child was indeed a blessing that would carry them both forward into whatever future awaited them. Chapter 5. The Cruel Revelation and Inner Transformation. Several days had passed since Grace's birth, and Zelda had begun to find a strange peace in the rhythm of hospital life. The nurses had stopped asking about her husband's absence, their pitying glances replaced by admiring respect for the young mother who faced each challenge with quiet dignity. She had chosen the name Grace, a choice that felt both hopeful and prophetic, as if the baby truly was a blessing that would carry them both forward. "She's gained weight beautifully," announced Dr. Sarah Chen during morning rounds, checking Grace's chart with obvious satisfaction. "And her mother is healing wonderfully. You'll both be ready to go home tomorrow." Home. The word should have brought comfort, but instead it filled Zelda with a hollow dread. Home meant facing the reality of Brian's absence, the questions about where he had been, the need to confront the growing certainty that something fundamental had broken in their marriage. As if summoned by her darkest thoughts, a commotion in the hallway drew her attention. Through the partially open door, she could see a woman approaching her room, tall, elegant, with auburn hair that caught the light like burnished copper. Even from a distance, Zelda recognized her from the society pages, Felicia Phillips, the woman whose name had begun appearing too frequently in conversations about Brian's professional life. Felicia entered without knocking, her designer heels clicking against the linoleum floor with predatory precision. She wore a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than most people's salary, and her smile held all the warmth of winter frost. "Well, well," Felicia said, her voice carrying a mockingly sweet tone. "The little mother, all alone with her baby. How touching." Zelda instinctively pulled Grace closer to her chest, protective instincts flaring at the obvious malice in the other woman's voice. "I'm sorry, visiting hours are over, and I don't believe we've been introduced." "Oh, but we have so much in common," Felicia replied, settling uninvited into the chair beside the bed. "We both know Brian Armstrong quite intimately, though I suspect my knowledge is rather more current than yours." The words hit Zelda like a physical blow, but she forced her expression to remain calm. "I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, darling. I'm stating facts." Felicia examined her manicured nails with affected boredom. "Brian has been sharing my bed for some time now. But I suppose you already suspected that, didn't you? All those late nights, all those urgent obligations that couldn't wait?" Zelda's arms tightened around Grace, who stirred restlessly, as if sensing her mother's distress. "You're lying." "Am I?" Felicia's green eyes glittered with cruel amusement. "Just nights ago, while you were here screaming in labor, he was in my apartment, making love to me with more passion than I imagine he's ever shown you. He turned off his phone, you know, said nothing was more important than being with me." The words carved through Zelda's heart like shattered glass, each syllable precisely calculated to inflict maximum damage. She felt the blood drain from her face, her hands trembling as she fought to maintain some semblance of composure. "I don't believe you," she whispered, though the protest sounded hollow even to her own ears. Felicia laughed, a sound like crystal breaking. "Believe what you want, sweetheart, but the truth doesn't change because you refuse to see it. Brian chose me that night. He chose passion over duty, excitement over obligation. He chose a real woman over a naive little girl playing house. Get out," Zelda said quietly, her voice barely audible. "Oh, I will. I just wanted to see you for myself, to understand what I was competing with." Felicia stood, smoothing down her skirt with deliberate slowness. "I must say I'm not impressed. I can see why Brian was so easily persuaded to look elsewhere for real companionship." She moved toward the door, then paused, delivering her final blow with surgical precision. "You should know that he's never mentioned you to me, not once. It's as if you and your little mistake don't even exist in his world. How does it feel to love someone so completely while being so utterly forgettable to them?" After Felicia left, Zelda sat in stunned silence, her daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms, oblivious to the destruction that had just been wrought. The cruel words echoed in her mind, each one confirming suspicions she had tried desperately to suppress. Brian's absence during labor wasn't an oversight or a failure of communication. It was a deliberate choice, a conscious decision to prioritize another woman over his wife and child. The tears came slowly at first, then in great shuddering sobs that seemed to tear from the very depths of her soul. She had been such a fool, clinging to the fantasy of their love, while he systematically dismantled their marriage. The man she had fallen in love with in that hospital room, had he ever really existed, or had she simply imagined the vulnerability and tenderness she thought she saw? "Mrs. Armstrong?" The gentle voice made her look up through her tears. Dr. Tim Rooney stood in the doorway, his kind face creased with concern. She had met him briefly during her stay, a respected physician who had consulted on Grace's care, though pediatrics wasn't his specialty. He was distinguished-looking, with graying temples and warm brown eyes that seemed to see too much. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "I didn't mean to—" "You have nothing to apologize for," he said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. "I couldn't help but overhear some of what that woman said to you. No one should have to endure such cruelty, especially not when you're recovering from childbirth." "It doesn't matter," Zelda replied, though her voice cracked on the words. "She was just telling the truth." Tim moved closer, his expression gentle but serious. "May I sit?" When she nodded, he settled into the chair Felicia had vacated, his presence somehow making the room feel safer, warmer. "I've been a doctor for many years," he said quietly. "I've seen families at their best and their worst, watched love triumph and watched it fail. But I've rarely seen someone display the strength and grace you've shown these past few days." "I don't feel strong," Zelda admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I feel like I'm falling apart." "Strength isn't the absence of pain," Tim replied. "It's the choice to keep going despite it. You've been alone for days, caring for your newborn daughter, and you haven't once let her see your suffering. That's not weakness, that's extraordinary courage." Something in his tone made her look up, meeting his eyes for the first time. There was no pity there, no judgment, only a deep, abiding kindness that reminded her of the way she used to look at her patients when she worked at the hospital. "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked. "You barely know me. Because kindness shouldn't require justification," he said simply. "And because I recognize something in you, a strength that hasn't been broken, even by betrayal. You're going to survive this, Zelda. More than that, you're going to thrive." The certainty in his voice sparked something deep within her, a tiny flame of possibility in the darkness of her despair. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've watched you these past few days. I've seen how you talk to your daughter, how you've handled every challenge with dignity and determination. That's not learned behavior, that's who you are at your core. And no one can take that away from you, no matter how badly they hurt you." Grace stirred in her arms, making small sounds of contentment, and Zelda looked down at her daughter's perfect face. In that moment she felt something shift inside her, not healing, not yet, but a recognition of her own power. She had created life, had brought this beautiful child into the world despite abandonment and betrayal. If she could do that, what else might she be capable of? "Thank you," she said to Tim, and for the first time in days she meant it completely. "You don't need to thank me. Just remember what I said. This is your beginning, not your ending." After he left, Zelda sat alone with her daughter, feeling as if she was seeing her situation clearly for the first time. The pain was still there, sharp and immediate, but beneath it lay something else, a steely determination that surprised her with its intensity. "Did you hear that, sweet girl?" she whispered to Grace. "We're going to be okay. Better than okay. Your mama is going to make sure of it." Outside her window, the sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Tomorrow they would leave this place and face whatever came next. But tonight, in this quiet moment, Zelda made a promise to herself and her daughter that would change everything. She would not be a victim. She would not be forgotten. And someday, somehow, she would make sure that Brian Armstrong understood exactly what he had lost when he chose betrayal over love. The transformation had begun, sparked by cruelty but nurtured by the kindness of a stranger who saw her worth even when she struggled to see it herself. In Grace's innocent trust and Tim's quiet encouragement, Zelda found the foundation for rebuilding not just her life, but her very sense of self. She was no longer just Brian's abandoned wife. She was Grace's mother, and that role would demand everything she had to give and more than she knew she possessed. Chapter 6. The Reconstruction of Life and Purpose. The apartment Zelda found was small, barely large enough for two people, but it felt like a palace compared to the suffocating emptiness of the mansion she had left behind. 2 rooms, a tiny kitchen, and windows that actually opened to let in fresh air. It was the first place that had felt like home since Grace's birth. "Are you sure about this?" asked Sarah, her sister, as she helped arrange the few belongings Zelda had taken from her marriage. "It's not too late to reconsider. Maybe Brian will come around, maybe—" "He's had plenty of time to come around," Zelda interrupted gently, folding Grace's tiny clothes into the dresser drawer. "Multiple opportunities during which he visited briefly, stayed for less than an hour each time, and spent most of that time on his phone. This isn't about him changing, Sarah. This is about me refusing to disappear." Grace gurgled happily from her bouncy seat, reaching for the colorful mobile hanging above her. She was already showing signs of her father's striking features: dark hair, intense eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. But her smile, Zelda noted with fierce pride, was entirely her own. "You don't have to do this alone," Sarah said softly. "You could move in with David and me, at least until you get back on your feet." "I need to do this alone," Zelda replied, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "I need to know that I can." The doorbell chimed, and Zelda's heart gave a small flutter. Tim had promised to stop by after his hospital shift to see how they were settling in. Over the past weeks, their friendship had become the anchor that kept her grounded. His presence a reminder that kindness existed in the world even when everything else seemed dark. "I'll get it," Sarah said, shooting her sister a knowing look. Tim appeared in the doorway carrying a basket that smelled like heaven and wore the kind of genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I brought dinner," he announced. "My grandmother's chicken soup recipe, and I figured you might not have had time to cook today." "You didn't have to do that," Zelda protested, though she was already moving toward him, drawn by the warmth he seemed to carry with him wherever he went. "I wanted to," he said simply, setting the basket on the small table. "Besides, someone needs to make sure you're eating properly. You're looking too thin." "I'm fine," she insisted, but even as she spoke, she realized she couldn't remember her last full meal. Between caring for Grace, finding an apartment, and navigating the complexities of separation, food had become an afterthought. "Of course you are," Tim agreed with gentle sarcasm. "That's why you're swaying on your feet." Sarah watched this exchange with growing amusement. "I'm going to run some errands," she announced diplomatically. "Give you two a chance to catch up." After she left, Tim moved around the small kitchen with easy familiarity, heating the soup and setting out bowls as if he had lived there for years. Grace watched him from her seat with bright, attentive eyes, and when he approached her, she broke into a delighted grin. "Well, hello there, beautiful girl," he said, lifting her from the seat with practiced ease. "Have you been helping your mama today?" Grace responded by grabbing his stethoscope and attempting to eat it, making Tim laugh, a rich, warm sound that filled the apartment with joy. "I see you're already showing medical interest. Very promising. She likes you," Zelda observed, feeling something warm and complicated flutter in her chest as she watched them together. "The feeling is entirely mutual," Tim replied, settling into the chair beside her with Grace contentedly nestled in his arms. "She's extraordinary, Zelda, just like her mother." "I'm not extraordinary," she protested. "I'm just trying to survive each day." "That's what makes you extraordinary," he said quietly. "Most people would have crumbled under what you've endured. Instead, you've created a home. You're caring for your daughter with infinite love, and you're building a new life from scratch. If that's not extraordinary, I don't know what is." They ate dinner together as the sun set outside her windows, Tim somehow managing to hold Grace while still helping himself to soup. The conversation flowed easily between them: hospital stories, plans for Grace's future, books they had both read. It felt natural, comfortable, like something they had been doing for years rather than weeks. "Tim," Zelda said as he prepared to leave, "can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why are you doing this? Being so kind to Grace and me?" "You don't owe us anything. He paused in putting on his coat, considering his words carefully. "Do you remember what you told me about dignity, that day we first really talked? About how everyone deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of their circumstances?" She nodded, remembering her words to Brian in that hospital room so many months ago. "You've been living that philosophy every day since I've known you," he continued. "Even when your husband abandoned you, even when that horrible woman tried to destroy you, even when you had every reason to become bitter and angry, you've remained kind. You've shown Grace nothing but love. You've treated every nurse and doctor with respect. You've faced each challenge with grace. That's rare, Zelda. That's precious. And it deserves to be protected. But you barely know me." "I know enough," he interrupted gently. "I know that you sing to Grace when you think no one is listening. I know that you always ask the cleaning staff about their families. I know that you apologize when you cry, as if sadness was something to be ashamed of. I know that you're stronger than you realize and more beautiful than you believe." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning and possibility. Zelda felt her cheeks warm as she processed what he had said, not just the compliments, but the careful observation they implied. He had been watching her, noticing her, seeing her in ways that Brian never had. "Tim, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I just want you to know that you're not alone. Grace isn't growing up without a father figure, if I have anything to say about it. And you're not facing this journey without support. Not as long as I'm around." After he left, Zelda sat in her quiet apartment with Grace sleeping peacefully in her arms. The contrast between this evening and the empty, echoing nights she had endured in Brian's mansion was stark. Here, in this tiny space with barely enough room for two, she felt more at peace than she had in months. "What do you think, sweet girl?" she whispered to her daughter. "Is it possible to find happiness after everything we've been through?" Grace stirred slightly, her tiny fingers curling around Zelda's thumb with instinctive trust. In that gesture, Zelda found her answer. Happiness might look different than she had originally planned, but it was possible. More than possible, it was growing slowly and carefully. In the quiet moments of kindness and connection she shared with a man who saw her worth, even when she struggled to see it herself. 2 weeks later, Zelda stood in the hospital cafeteria where she had once worked, applying for her old position. The head nurse, Margaret, looked her up and down with sharp, assessing eyes. "You know the hours are difficult," Margaret said, "and you'll need reliable childcare." "I've already arranged that," Zelda replied, thinking of Tim's offer to help with Grace whenever his schedule allowed. "I need to work, Margaret. I need to support my daughter. And your husband. What does he think about his wife returning to work?" My husband," Zelda said carefully, "is no longer part of my decision-making process." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "Good for you, child. When can you start?" As Zelda walked through the familiar halls later that day, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: purpose. She had loved nursing, had found meaning in caring for others, and returning to it felt like reclaiming a part of herself that had been lost in the chaos of marriage and motherhood. "Excuse me," called a voice behind her. She turned to see Tim approaching, his face bright with surprise and pleasure. "What are you doing here?" "I got my job back," she said, unable to suppress the pride in her voice. "I start Monday." "That's wonderful," he said, and she could see that he genuinely meant it. "Grace will be so proud of her mother. Will you walk with me?" she asked impulsively. "I want to see the maternity ward again, where she was born." As they walked together through the hospital corridors, Tim's hand occasionally brushing hers, Zelda realized that this was what rebuilding looked like. Not grand gestures or dramatic transformations, but small steps toward independence, quiet moments of connection, and the growing certainty that she deserved better than abandonment and betrayal. Behind them, neither noticed Brian Armstrong standing in the executive wing, watching through the glass partition as his estranged wife laughed at something the doctor said to her. For the first time since their separation began, he felt the sharp sting of jealousy, recognizing too late what he had thrown away in his pursuit of meaningless passion. Chapter 7. The Contrast of True Character. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the ballroom as Brian Armstrong adjusted his black tie, his reflection in the gilt-framed mirror showing a man who appeared to have everything and felt utterly empty. Tonight's charity gala was another opportunity to display his wealth and status, another chance to remind society of his power and desirability. "You look magnificent," Felicia purred, sliding up behind him in a dress that cost more than most people's cars. The deep emerald silk clung to her curves like liquid sin, and her smile held the satisfied gleam of a woman who believed she had won the ultimate prize. "We look magnificent," Brian corrected, though his tone lacked enthusiasm. "Power couple of the year, or so the society pages will say tomorrow." "As they should," she replied, her fingers straightening his collar with possessive precision. "We command attention wherever we go. People want to be us, Brian. They want what we have. What we have." The phrase echoed in his mind as they made their grand entrance into the ballroom, heads turning and whispers following in their wake. But what did they have, really? Passion, certainly. Sexual chemistry that burned bright and hot. The satisfaction of mutual ambition and shared hunger for the finer things in life. But as the evening progressed, Brian found himself watching the other couples at the gala with unexpected attention. There was Senator Harrison, dancing with his wife after decades of partnership, their movements perfectly synchronized. Judge Martinez, laughing at something his husband whispered in his ear, their connection so natural it seemed to radiate warmth. "Stop staring at the peasants," Felicia hissed in his ear as they paused near the champagne fountain. "You're supposed to be charming the Pemberton family. They're considering a significant involvement with us." "Right," Brian replied, forcing his attention back to the task at hand. But even as he worked the room with practiced charm, part of his mind wandered to a small apartment across town where Zelda was probably reading bedtime stories to their daughter. Their daughter, Grace. He had seen her only briefly since her birth, each visit feeling more awkward and uncomfortable than the last. The baby would cry when he held her, as if sensing his discomfort, and Zelda would take her back with an efficiency that made him feel like an intruder in what should have been his own family. "You're distracted tonight," Felicia observed as they settled at their table for dinner. "What's wrong with you?" Nothing's wrong," he replied automatically. "Just thinking about various obligations." "Liar." Her green eyes narrowed dangerously. "You've been strange all week, ever since you went to that hospital for your annual checkup and saw her." The accusation hung between them like a challenge. It was true. Seeing Zelda at the hospital, watching her laugh with that doctor, had unsettled him in ways he didn't want to examine. She had looked radiant, happy, complete without him. "Zelda is my past," he said firmly. "You're my present and my future." "Good," Felicia replied, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Because I won't share you with a memory, Brian. I won't be second place to some pathetic little nurse playing victim." The venom in her voice when she spoke about Zelda made something twist uncomfortably in his chest. When had Felicia become so cruel? When had her wit turned into meanness, her confidence into arrogance? "She's not pathetic," he found himself saying before he could stop the words. Felicia's fork clattered against her plate. "Excuse me? I said she's not pathetic," Brian repeated, surprised by his own defensiveness. "Whatever else Zelda is, she's not pathetic. She's caring for our daughter alone, working to support herself. That takes strength." "Strength?" Felicia's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "Is that what you call it? I call it desperation. Clinging to a marriage that's over, trying to trap you with a baby you never wanted. I never said I didn't want the baby. Didn't you?" Felicia leaned forward, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Because I distinctly remember you saying that becoming a father felt like a trap, that the pregnancy changed everything between you." I remember you telling me that you felt suffocated by domesticity, that you needed to remember who you really were. The words hit him like physical blows because they were true. He had said those things, had meant them at the time. But hearing them repeated back to him now, stripped of passion and justification, they sounded hollow and selfish. That was different, he said weakly. I was confused, overwhelmed. You were honest, Felicia interrupted. For the first time in your marriage, you were finally honest about what you wanted. And what you wanted was me. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and mechanical conversations. Brian played his part perfectly, the successful man with his stunning companion. But something fundamental had shifted. Every laugh felt hollow. Every touch from Felicia felt calculating. Every compliment felt like manipulation. It was nearly midnight when they returned to his penthouse, and Felicia wasted no time in pressing herself against him, her hands already working at his shirt buttons. I've been thinking about this all night, she breathed against his throat. Thinking about proving to you again why I'm everything you need. But as her lips found his, Brian found himself pulling away, creating distance between them for the first time in their relationship. What's wrong? She demanded, her eyes flashing with anger and hurt pride. I'm tired, he said, though they both knew it was a lie. It's been a long night. Since when has being tired ever stopped you? Felicia's voice grew sharp, suspicious. You've never turned me down before, never. There's a first time for everything, he replied, moving to pour himself a drink, with hands that trembled slightly. Felicia watched him with the calculating gaze of a predator sensing weakness. This is about her, isn't it? About your precious little wife and your unwanted baby. They're not unwanted, Brian said quietly, the words surprising him as much as they surprised her. What did you just say? I said they're not unwanted. He turned to face her, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. My daughter isn't unwanted. She's innocent in all of this. And Zelda never deserved what I put her through. Felicia's beautiful face contorted with rage. Don't you dare, she snarled. Don't you dare stand there and romanticize that pathetic woman now that you're bored with me. I've given you everything, Brian, everything you said you wanted. You've given me passion, he agreed. Excitement, validation, but you've never given me peace. Peace? She laughed bitterly. Peace is for weak men, Brian. You're not weak. You're powerful, ambitious, magnificent. Peace is what ordinary people settle for when they can't handle anything more intense. Maybe I'm more ordinary than either of us thought, he said softly. The slap came without warning, sharp and stinging across his cheek. Felicia stood before him, breathing hard, her carefully applied makeup smeared, her sophisticated facade cracking to reveal something ugly beneath. You're disgusting, she spat. Weak and disgusting. Do you know what I sacrificed for you? The opportunities I turned down, the men I refused. I bet everything on you, Brian Armstrong, and now you want to crawl back to some insignificant little nobody. No, I'm not crawling back to anyone, he replied, touching his stinging cheek. I'm just finally seeing things clearly. Felicia grabbed her purse, her movements sharp with fury. Let me make something clear for you then. If you think you can throw away what we have for some fantasy reconciliation with your wife, you're more deluded than I thought. She'll never take you back, Brian, not after what you did to her. Not after what we did to her. I know, he said simply, and the quiet acceptance in his voice seemed to deflate her rage slightly. Then what's the point of this? What's the point of destroying what we have? Brian looked at her, really looked, and saw the desperation beneath the anger, the fear that she had miscalculated, that she had chosen poorly. For the first time since their affair began, he felt something like pity for her. The point, he said gently, is that I finally understand the difference between wanting someone and loving them. And I finally understand what I lost. Felicia left without another word, her designer heels clicking furiously across the marble floor. After the door slammed behind her, Brian stood alone in his penthouse, overlooking the glittering city. finally understanding that all the wealth and power in the world couldn't fill the void left by authentic love, freely given and carelessly thrown away. In the silence of his empty home, he thought of Zelda and Grace, sleeping peacefully in their small apartment, surrounded by the warmth of genuine affection and the promise of a better future. For the first time since their affair began, Brian Armstrong understood exactly what he had sacrificed for the hollow satisfaction of selfish desire. Chapter 8. The Declaration of Superior Love. The cherry blossoms were in full bloom in the hospital's memorial garden, their delicate pink petals dancing on the spring breeze like confetti celebrating new beginnings. Zelda sat on the weathered stone bench where she and Tim had shared lunch countless times, watching Grace toddle unsteadily between the flower beds with the fearless determination of a child discovering the world. "Mama, look," Grace babbled, holding up a fallen petal with the triumphant pride of someone who had just discovered treasure. "I see." "Sweetheart," Zelda called back, her heart swelling with the pure joy that seemed to multiply daily in their simple life. "It's beautiful, almost as beautiful as her mother," Tim's voice came from behind her, warm with affection and something deeper that made her pulse quicken. She turned to find him approaching with coffee from the hospital cafeteria and a smile that never failed to make her feel like the most important person in the world. Over the months, she had grown to depend on these quiet moments together, stolen between his surgeries and her shifts, where they could simply exist as Tim and Zelda rather than doctor and nurse. "You're early," she observed as he settled beside her, their shoulders touching in the casual intimacy that had developed between them. "I thought you had that consultation this afternoon." "Finished earlier than expected," he replied, but something in his tone suggested there was more to the story. "Actually, I have something important to discuss with you." Before she could ask what he meant, Grace came running toward them with her peculiar toddler gait, her arms outstretched and her face bright with excitement. Tim caught her effortlessly, lifting her high in the air until she squealed with delight. "Uncle Tim," she chanted, her word for him that never failed to make him smile. Though she had never called Brian Daddy, she had taken to Tim instantly, as if recognizing in him the father figure she had been missing. "Hello, Princess," Tim murmured, settling her on his lap where she immediately began playing with his stethoscope. "Have you been helping your mama today?" "Always," Grace replied solemnly, then promptly forgot about the conversation as a butterfly caught her attention. Watching them together, Zelda felt the familiar tightness in her chest that had nothing to do with sadness and everything to do with the growing realization that this man had become essential to both her and her daughter's happiness. He had never once made her feel like a burden or a charity case. Instead, he had somehow made their little family feel complete. "Zelda," Tim said softly, his voice carrying an unusual nervousness that immediately captured her attention. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you from the beginning." "What is it?" she asked, noting the way his free hand fidgeted with something in his jacket pocket. "I haven't been entirely honest with you about who I am," he began, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "About my background, my family, my circumstances." A cold fear gripped her. "Are you married?" "No," he said quickly, understanding her panic. "Nothing like that. It's about my position, Zelda, about my family's standing and all the things I know you've been hurt by before." "I don't understand." Tim took a deep breath, as if steeling himself for a difficult confession. "My family has been involved in medical philanthropy for generations. We have hospitals, research facilities, and a charitable foundation that works internationally. I'm not just a doctor, Zelda. I'm well established, very well established." The words hung in the air between them while Zelda processed this revelation. She had known Tim was successful. His position at the hospital, his obvious education and refinement had made that clear. But what he was describing was influence on a scale that dwarfed even Brian's position. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked quietly. "Because I was terrified you'd run away," he admitted. "I watched what wealth and power did to you in your marriage. I saw how it corrupted the man you loved, how it turned what should have been a blessing into a burden. I was afraid that if you knew about my background, you'd see me differently. And now I can't hide it anymore, because I need to ask you something. And I need you to know everything before you answer." He shifted Grace gently to his other knee, then reached into his jacket pocket with his free hand. When he withdrew it, Zelda's breath caught in her throat. The ring he held was unlike anything she had ever seen. Not the ostentatious display that Brian had chosen, but something elegant and timeless, with a center stone that caught the light like captured starlight. "Zelda rose," Tim said, his voice steady, despite the emotion she could see in his eyes. "I have loved you since the night I watched you give birth to Grace alone, and still find the strength to whisper words of love to your daughter. I have loved you through every challenge, every small victory, every moment of joy and sadness we've shared. I love your strength, your kindness, your fierce protection of Grace, and the way you see the best in everyone around you." Grace, sensing the importance of the moment, even if she couldn't understand it, had grown still in his arms, her dark eyes moving between the two adults with solemn attention. "I love Grace as if she were my own daughter," Tim continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "I love the family we've become together, and I want to make it official. Not because you need rescuing, and not because I need completing, but because we're better together than we could ever be apart." Tears had begun streaming down Zelda's face, but she made no move to wipe them away. The contrast between this moment and Brian's proposal was stark. There was no manipulation here, no sense that she was being purchased or possessed. Tim was offering partnership, not ownership. "Will you marry me, Zelda? Will you let me be Grace's father and your husband for all the right reasons this time?" "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, of course. Yes." The ring slipped onto her finger as if it had been made for her, and when Tim kissed her, Grace clapped her hands with delight, as if she understood that something wonderful had just happened. "So," Zelda said when they finally broke apart, holding up her hand to admire the ring, "just how well established are we talking about?" Tim laughed, the sound rich with relief and joy. "Well established enough that Grace will never want for anything. Well established enough that you'll never have to worry about security again. Well established enough that we can change the world if we want to. And what do you want to do with all this influence?" "Build the best children's hospital in the country," he said without hesitation. "Fund medical research that will help families like the ones you used to care for. Use it to make a difference instead of just accumulating more." "I love you," she said simply, and the words felt different than they ever had before. Not desperate or grateful or dependent, but joyful and free and chosen. The engagement announcement appeared in the society pages days later, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. Tim Rooney, it turned out, was not just wealthy, but genuinely respected throughout the medical and philanthropic communities. His family's foundation had funded breakthrough research in pediatric medicine, built free clinics in underserved communities, and educated countless doctors worldwide. "Did you see this?" Sarah burst into Zelda's apartment waving a newspaper, her eyes bright with excitement. "They're calling you the Angel of Mercy, who captured the heart of the most eligible bachelor in philanthropy." "That's ridiculous," Zelda protested, though she couldn't suppress her smile as she read the glowing article describing Tim's accomplishments and their romance. "Ridiculous and wonderful," Sarah corrected. "Do you know what this means? You're not just moving on from Brian, you're moving up, way up." The true magnitude of Tim's status became clear over the following weeks, as engagement congratulations poured in from people Zelda had never heard of, but who apparently moved in the highest circles of society. Hospital board members, university presidents, heads of major charities, all expressing their delight at Tim's choice and their eagerness to meet his fiancée. "I had no idea," Margaret confessed during one of their shifts together. "I mean, I knew Dr. Rooney was important, but I didn't realize his family was practically medical royalty." "Neither did I," Zelda admitted, still adjusting to the reality of her new circumstances. "But it doesn't change who he is. It doesn't change how he treats Grace and me." "No," Margaret agreed, "but it sure changes how the world is going to treat you." She was right. Within days of the announcement, Zelda found herself fielding calls from journalists wanting interviews, invitations to galas and charity events, and even requests from magazines to feature their inspiring journey from heartbreak to happiness. "I don't want any of this attention," she confessed to Tim one evening as they walked through his family's estate, a sprawling property that made Brian's mansion look modest by comparison. "You don't have to want it," he replied, Grace riding contentedly on his shoulders. "But you might find you can use it. Platform like this, you could advocate for healthcare reform, single mothers, whatever causes matter to you. What if I just want to be a wife and mother?" "Then that's what you'll be," he said simply. "But you'll be my wife and Grace's mother, which means you'll have resources to be whatever else you want to be too." That night, as they stood on the terrace overlooking gardens that seemed to stretch to the horizon, Zelda realized that her story wasn't just about moving on from betrayal. It was about discovering that love didn't have to mean limitation, that partnership could mean expansion rather than confinement. Somewhere across the city, in a much smaller penthouse, Brian Armstrong read the same newspaper article repeatedly, finally understanding the magnitude of what he had lost. Chapter 9. The Preparation for Public Vindication. The cathedral stood like a monument to eternal love, its Gothic spires reaching toward heaven as if offering prayers on behalf of all who entered seeking blessing. St. Patrick's Cathedral, the historic landmark that had witnessed the weddings of presidents, royalty and titans of industry for generations. This was where Timothy Rooney and Zelda Rose would exchange vows in the coming weeks. Zelda stood in the empty nave during their final walkthrough, her hand resting on Tim's arm as the wedding coordinator, a woman whose services were typically reserved for heads of state, explained the ceremony's logistics. The magnitude of what was happening still felt surreal, like a dream she might wake from at any moment. "The guest list has grown extensively," Mrs. Pemberton informed them, consulting her leather-bound planner. "We've had to respectfully decline numerous additional requests. The governor sends his regrets, prior engagement, but the mayor will be attending, along with several senators and the entire board of the Children's Medical Foundation." "This is insane," Zelda whispered to Tim. "Weeks ago, I was worried about affording Grace's daycare, and now senators are coming to my wedding." "Our wedding," Tim corrected gently, squeezing her hand. "And they're not coming because of the spectacle. Zelda, they're coming because they respect what our foundation has accomplished, and because they want to meet the woman who's inspired me to do even more." Grace, now walking steadily, had escaped from her Aunt Sarah's supervision and was exploring the cathedral's side chapels with the fearless curiosity that characterized everything she did. Her delighted laughter echoed off the stone walls, bringing warmth to the solemn space. "The media coverage will be extensive," Mrs. Pemberton continued. "Society magazines, medical journals, philanthropic newsletters. Everyone wants to document the union of two families dedicated to healing and service." "Two families?" Zelda asked. "It's just Grace and me." "My dear," Mrs. Pemberton smiled kindly, "you've been a single mother working as a nurse while building a better life for your daughter. That's a story of service and sacrifice that resonates with everyone. Combined with Timothy's legacy, this wedding represents hope, renewal, and the triumph of genuine love over cynicism. After the coordinator left, Tim and Zelda sat in the front pew watching Grace toddle between the elaborate floral arrangements being installed for the ceremony. White roses, lilies, and baby's breath created cascading displays that seemed to glow in the colored light streaming through the stained glass windows. "Are you having second thoughts?" Tim asked quietly, noting the contemplative expression on Zelda's face. "Not about you," she replied quickly. "Never about you. But all of this," she gestured around the cathedral, "it feels so public, so exposed. What if people think I'm just another gold digger who traded up when her first marriage failed?" "People who matter will know better," Tim said firmly. "And people who don't matter, well, their opinions aren't worth your concern." "Brian thinks I'm a gold digger," she said softly. "He's been telling people that I left him for someone richer, that I planned this whole thing." Tim's jaw tightened. Brian Armstrong is in no position to judge anyone's motives. Besides, let him talk. The truth has a way of revealing itself. Across the city, Brian Armstrong sat in his lawyer's office, staring at the wedding invitation that had arrived that morning. Heavy cream paper with elegant gold script. It was a formal announcement that Zelda Rose and Timothy Rooney requested the honor of his presence at their wedding celebration. "It's a deliberate provocation," his attorney James Mitchell observed, "sending you an invitation when she knows the history between you. Or it's Rooney's way of showing me exactly what I lost," Brian replied, his thumb tracing the embossed lettering. "Do you know who this man is, James?" "Really no? I've done some research since you asked. The Rooney family essentially built modern pediatric medicine. Their foundation has more influence in healthcare policy than most government agencies. Timothy Rooney personally holds patents on surgical techniques that have saved thousands of children's lives, and his standing. Conservative estimates put it far above yours," James said bluntly. "The man could overshadow you without affecting his quarterly activities." Brian felt something cold settle in his stomach. Not just wealthy, obscenely, generationally changed the world wealthy. The kind of wealth that came with genuine power and respect, rather than just influence and fear. "I have to go," he said suddenly. "Brian, I strongly advise against—" "I have to see this for myself," Brian interrupted. "I have to see her marry him." That evening, Brian found himself at Felicia's apartment, though he wasn't entirely sure why. Their relationship had been strained since his moment of clarity at the charity gala, and her welcome was noticeably cooler than it once had been. "You look terrible," she observed as she poured herself a glass of wine, pointedly not offering him one. "What fresh crisis is consuming you now?" "Zelda's getting married," he said simply. Felicia's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Of course she is. Let me guess, some middle-aged doctor with a savior complex who thinks he's rescuing the poor abandoned wife. Timothy Rooney." The wineglass slipped from Felicia's fingers, shattering against the marble floor in a spray of burgundy liquid and crystal shards. "What did you just say?" "She's marrying Timothy Rooney. The wedding is soon at St. Patrick's Cathedral." Felicia stared at him for a long moment, her face cycling through expressions of disbelief, rage, and something that looked like panic. "That's impossible. Timothy Rooney doesn't date. He certainly doesn't marry random nurses with illegitimate children. Apparently he does." "No," Felicia said firmly, beginning to pace. "No, this is some kind of mistake, some elaborate lie. I've been trying to get an introduction to Timothy Rooney for years. Do you know what marriage to him would mean? The social position, the philanthropic influence, the connections." "I'm beginning to understand," Brian said quietly, watching her growing agitation with fascination. "She can't have him," Felicia continued, her voice rising. "That pathetic little nobody can't just stumble into the most eligible bachelor in the country. It's not fair. It's not right. Fair." Brian found himself defending his estranged wife. "Zelda didn't stumble into anything. She's been working at the hospital, caring for her daughter, building a life. If Rooney fell in love with her, it's because she deserved his love." Felicia whirled to face him. "Don't you dare take her side. Not after everything we've shared, everything I've given up for you." "What exactly have you given up, Felicia?" The question seemed to surprise them both. "What have you sacrificed that wasn't just a calculated investment in what you thought I could provide?" "I gave up other opportunities. To be with wealthier men," he finished. "To climb higher on the social ladder." "You never gave up anything for me, Felicia. You gave up things for what you thought I represented." "And what exactly do you think Zelda gave up for you?" She shot back. "Her freedom, her innocence, her trust." The words hit their target with devastating accuracy. Zelda had given up everything for him, her independence, her careful boundaries, her very identity as a strong woman who didn't need rescuing. She had trusted him completely, and he had destroyed that trust through selfishness and cowardice. "We're going to that wedding," Felicia announced suddenly. "Both of us. Why would we do that?" "Because I want to see this fairy tale for myself. I want to watch her realize that marrying wealth doesn't erase the past, doesn't make her worthy of the position she's stealing." "And what do you hope to accomplish?" "Nothing," Felicia said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I just want to be there when reality crashes down on her perfect little fantasy. When she realizes that people like us don't just disappear because she found herself a richer husband." As Brian drove home through the quiet streets, he wondered what exactly he hoped to accomplish by attending Zelda's wedding. Was it closure, some desperate hope for reconciliation? Or was it simply the need to witness the final chapter of their story, to see with his own eyes the life she had built from the ashes of their marriage? One thing was certain. Soon, he would sit in that cathedral and watch the woman he had abandoned marry a man who valued her in ways he had never learned to do. And perhaps, finally, he would understand the true magnitude of his loss. The invitation lay on his passenger seat, catching the light from passing street lamps like a beacon, pointing toward a reckoning he wasn't sure he was ready to face. But ready or not, it was coming, and with it would come the final accounting of all his choices, both the ones he had made and the ones he had failed to make when it mattered most. Chapter 10. The Climactic Confrontation and Final Triumph. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows of St. Patrick's Cathedral, painting rainbow prisms across the white marble floor as society's most influential figures took their seats for what the newspapers had already declared the wedding of the decade. Senators sat beside university presidents. Hospital board members shared pews with international diplomats, and the soft murmur of conversations created a backdrop of anticipation that seemed to make the very air vibrate with importance. In the bride's preparation room, Zelda stood before an antique mirror wearing a gown that seemed spun from moonlight and dreams. The ivory silk flowed around her like liquid starlight, and the antique lace veil, a Rooney family heirloom worn by generations of brides, crowned her dark hair like a benediction. At her feet, Grace toddled around in a miniature version of the gown, her flower girl dress making her look like a tiny angel. "You look like a queen," Sarah whispered, her eyes bright with tears of joy. "Mama would have been so proud." "I feel like I'm living someone else's life," Zelda admitted, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her necklace, a simple strand of pearls that had belonged to Tim's grandmother. "Months ago I was delivering my baby alone, and now you're marrying the most respected man in the country," Sarah finished firmly, "because you deserve every bit of happiness that's coming to you." Outside the preparation room, the cathedral had filled to capacity. Camera flashes sparkled like stars as photographers documented the arrival of each distinguished guest. The mayor of the city sat in a prominent row, flanked by senators whose healthcare legislation had been influenced by Rooney Foundation research. University chancellors, medical pioneers, and philanthropic leaders filled the pews, their presence a testament to the groom's extraordinary standing in society. "Have you ever seen anything like this?" whispered Dr. Martinez to her companion as they observed the gathering. "It's like a summit of everyone who matters in medicine and public service." "Timothy Rooney could have married royalty," came the reply. "The fact that he chose a nurse who built her life from nothing. It says everything about both of them." Several rose from the back. Brian Armstrong sat beside Felicia Phillips, both of them dressed in their finest attire, but looking increasingly out of place among the genuinely powerful people surrounding them. Brian's expensive suit, which had once made him feel sophisticated and successful, now seemed shabby compared to the understated elegance of the true elite around them. "I can't believe she managed to fool him," Felicia hissed under her breath, her green eyes scanning the cathedral with growing agitation. "Look at these people, Brian. This is where I belong, not some nobody nurse who got pregnant and played victim." "Keep your voice down," Brian muttered. Though his own discomfort was evident, every conversation he overheard seemed to reference medical breakthroughs, charitable initiatives, or policy changes that had touched millions of lives. These weren't people who had bought their way into society. They had earned their positions through service and sacrifice. "The bride has been an inspiration to single mothers everywhere," he heard a woman behind them saying, "working full-time as a nurse while raising her daughter alone. And now she's promised to expand the Children's Healthcare Advocacy Program. She's remarkable." "And Dr. Rooney," her companion replied. "My grandson's life was saved by a surgical technique he pioneered. When I heard he was marrying the nurse who helped care for pediatric patients at Metropolitan General, I knew it was a love story for the ages." Felicia's face was growing paler with each overheard comment, each glowing reference to the bride's character and accomplishments. This wasn't the narrative she had constructed in her mind, the desperate woman clinging to any man who would have her. This was a woman who had built respect and admiration through her own actions, who was beloved not for her beauty or cunning, but for her genuine service to others. The organ's triumphant notes suddenly filled the cathedral, and every head turned toward the doors at the back of the nave. The wedding procession began with a parade of children from the hospital's pediatric ward, each one walking carefully down the aisle, carrying single white roses, patients whose lives had been touched by both the bride's nursing care and the groom's medical innovations. Grace appeared next, her tiny hands gripping a basket of rose petals that she scattered with the serious concentration of someone entrusted with a vital mission. When she spotted Tim waiting at the altar, her face lit up with pure joy, and she abandoned her careful walk to run toward him with arms outstretched. "Daddy," she called out clearly, her voice carrying through the cathedral's acoustics. Tim caught her with ease, lifting her high enough to kiss her cheek before settling her in the arms of his sister, who would hold her during the ceremony. The collective awe from the congregation was audible, and several society photographers captured the moment that would grace magazine covers for weeks to come. Then the bride appeared. The entire cathedral seemed to hold its breath as Zelda glided down the aisle, her beauty transcendent but somehow secondary to the radiance that seemed to emanate from within. She moved with a grace that spoke of inner strength rather than practiced elegance. Her eyes locked on Tim's face with a love so pure and obvious that even the most cynical observers felt their hearts stir. "My God," Brian breathed, his words barely audible even to himself. This wasn't the broken, abandoned woman he had left behind. This was a queen approaching her coronation, a woman who had not only survived betrayal, but had emerged stronger, more beautiful, more worthy of devotion than he had ever realized. Every step she took seemed to emphasize the magnitude of his loss, the depth of his failure to recognize the treasure he had possessed. Felicia's hands clenched into fists as she watched the procession, her perfectly applied makeup beginning to show stress cracks around her eyes. "This isn't possible," she whispered. "This can't be happening." When Zelda reached the altar, Tim took her hands with a reverence that spoke of worship rather than mere affection. The officiant, a bishop whose presence indicated the ceremony's spiritual as well as social significance, began the service with words about love transcending earthly concerns, about partnerships that served purposes greater than individual happiness. Dearly beloved, in the bishop's voice carried clearly through the cathedral, we are gathered here today to witness the union of two souls who have found in each other not just love, but purpose. Timothy and Zelda have each dedicated their lives to healing others, and today they pledged to heal the world together. The vows they exchanged were personal, heartfelt, and devastatingly beautiful. Tim spoke of finding in Zelda the missing piece of his soul, the woman who made his success meaningful and his future bright. Zelda's words about second chances and the courage to love again brought tears to eyes throughout the congregation. "You saved me," she said, her voice clear despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her, "not by rescuing me from my circumstances, but by showing me that I was worth saving. You loved Grace before she was yours, and you loved me when I had forgotten how to love myself." When the bishop pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared seemed to seal not just their union, but their transformation into something greater than either could have achieved alone. The cathedral erupted in applause that spoke of genuine joy rather than mere social obligation. As the recessional began and the newly married couple prepared to walk back down the aisle, Felicia suddenly stood up, her movement sharp and violent enough to draw attention from several nearby guests. The elegant composure she had maintained throughout the ceremony finally cracked under the weight of witnessing Zelda's ultimate triumph. "I can't," she said, her voice cracking with barely controlled hysteria. "I can't watch this anymore." The guests nearest to her turned in alarm, sensing the disturbance rippling through the sacred atmosphere of the cathedral. Murmurs began to spread as people craned their necks to see what was happening. The peaceful conclusion of the ceremony suddenly disrupted by an unexpected drama. "Felicia, sit down," Brian hissed, grabbing her arm. "No!" She yanked away from him, her voice rising dangerously. "This is wrong. This is all wrong. She doesn't deserve this." The commotion had begun to spread, guests turning to stare as Felicia pushed past Brian into the aisle. Her carefully constructed facade was crumbling, revealing the desperate, grasping woman beneath the sophisticated exterior. "She's nothing," Felicia shouted, her voice echoing off the cathedral walls. "A nobody nurse who trapped one man with a pregnancy and seduced another with sob stories. This isn't a fairy tale, it's a con game." Security began moving toward her, but Felicia was beyond caring about consequences. All the rage, jealousy, and frustrated ambition that had been building for months finally exploded in a spectacular public breakdown. "I gave up everything for you," she screamed at Brian, who had followed her into the aisle looking mortified. "Everything? And for what? So you could sit here mourning some pathetic woman who never deserved you in the first place." The entire cathedral had fallen silent, except for Felicia's increasingly hysterical voice. Camera flashes exploded as photographers captured every moment of her meltdown, her carefully applied makeup now streaked with tears of rage and humiliation. "You destroyed me for her," she continued, advancing on Brian with fury radiating from every line of her body. "You threw away what we had, what we could have been, for a fantasy about a woman who's forgotten you even exist. Look at her, Brian! Look at how she looks at him. She never looked at you that way because you never deserved it." "Now, Felicia, stop!" Brian pleaded, acutely aware of the hundreds of eyes watching their disgrace unfold. "Stop?" Felicia laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut glass. "Why should I stop?" "Because we're embarrassing ourselves. Because we're proving that we're exactly the kind of people who don't belong in a place like this." She gestured wildly around the cathedral, her movements becoming more erratic with each word. "She won!" Felicia screamed. "The little nobody won everything. She has the man, the wealth, the respect, the perfect family. And what do we have? What do we have to show for destroying her life? Her hand came up without warning, connecting with Brian's cheek in a slap that cracked through the cathedral like a gunshot. The force of it staggered him, leaving a vivid red handprint on his face as gasps echoed from the shocked congregation. "You betrayed her, you betrayed me, and now you've lost everything," Felicia shrieked, her voice breaking with the force of her emotion. "She's a queen now, and you're nothing but dust beneath her feet. We're both nothing." Security finally reached them, gently but firmly, escorting the sobbing, ranting woman from the cathedral as she continued to scream about injustice and betrayal. Her voice echoed off the ancient stones, even as she was led away, a final desperate protest against a reality she could not accept. Brian followed, his face burning with shame and humiliation, unable to meet the eyes of anyone around him. The man who had once commanded respect now found himself the object of pity and disgust. His public humiliation complete. Several guests reached for their phones, the shocking scene too dramatic to ignore, while others simply stared in stunned silence at the unprecedented display of raw emotion and desperation that had just unfolded in one of the city's most sacred spaces. As the doors closed behind them, cutting off Felicia's distant wails, the cathedral slowly returned to the business of celebration. The bishop, with admirable composure, gestured for the recessional to continue. Tim and Zelda, who had watched the entire spectacle with expressions of pity rather than anger, began their walk down the aisle as husband and wife. Grace rode in Tim's arms, pointing excitedly at the flowers and completely oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded. "Are you all right?" Tim asked quietly as they walked. "I'm perfect," Zelda replied, and the serenity in her voice proved she meant it completely. "They can't touch what we have, Tim. Nothing they do or say can diminish this moment or this love." As they reached the cathedral doors and stepped into the sunlight, flashbulbs exploded like fireworks, documenting their emergence as one of society's most powerful and respected couples. The reception would host presidents and prime ministers. Their honeymoon would be covered by international media, and their marriage would be studied as an example of love conquering adversity. Behind them, in the shadow of the cathedral steps, Brian Armstrong stood alone, finally understanding that he had not just lost a wife, he had lost his chance at redemption, at love, at becoming the man he might have been. Felicia was gone, taken away in a car that would likely deliver her to a psychiatric facility. And with her went the last vestiges of the life he had built on selfishness and betrayal. As the Rooney wedding party swept away in a procession of luxury vehicles toward their celebration, Brian remained on the empty steps, a man who had gambled everything on his own worst instincts and lost more than he had ever imagined possible. The woman he had abandoned had indeed become a queen, while he had proven himself to be exactly what Felicia had called him in her moment of devastating clarity, nothing but dust beneath her feet.